Yesterday, we talked about small donations. We talked to the executive director of Act Blue. They processed $1.6 billion in small donations, averaging about $40 a piece. That included, four figures, maybe even some five-figure donations. Today, we're talking about the biggest givers, the biggest contributors. And joining us from The Guardian, Natalie Jones, who did a story on the 20 biggest political donors this election, and want to talk to her about what we might learn from that. Natalie, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no, welcome. What most surprised you when you were doing this reporting?
I think the most surprising thing is how many of these names I hadn't heard of before. And many of them I had heard of before, and you've probably heard of before. But some of these billionaires and millionaires are able to fly under the radar much more than I would have expected, and especially for people who have such big influence. So, yeah, that was very surprising.
So Sheldon Miriam Adelson in the story was number one, 113 million, more than double that number two. And if you add, I think everybody below the top seven up, they might match what the Adelsons did. There's been some coverage of that. Number two, Tom Steyer and Kathryn Taylor. He's the guy who's been doing the impeach Trump ads. Some have thought he might run for president. But third on your list, Richard and Elizabeth Uline, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. I hadn't heard of them. What do we know about Richard and Elizabeth Uline, who donated $39 million?
Yeah, so they were covered. The New York Times did a story about them recently and called them the most powerful conservative couple you've never heard of. And they have been very active in their home state of Wisconsin for a long time, but a little more low profile nationally. But they are, very active locally and starting to extend that reach and giving to very conservative PACs and candidates.
And they gave $6.7 million for the Club for Growth action. Remind people the Club for Growth.
The Club for Growth action is a super PAC that's dedicated to supporting anti-big government and pro-growth candidates. So that's pretty general. That's their focus. So there may be some conservative candidates that don't fit into that category, but they're specifically looking for those people that are supporting business and are anti-big government. And I should also mention that some of these numbers are probably at least. So because of the way that political giving is in this country right now, all of these people have most likely given to other organizations and political action committees that aren't recorded and that we don't know about. So listeners should keep that in mind.
And I want to get to that and talk about it. I want to talk a little about the names, but please don't hang up on us before we talk about that. Fourth on your list, Michael Bloomberg. People know that he's been working a lot, particularly on fighting gun violence. Donald Sussman at $22.8 million comes in at number five. Is a hedge fund guy. James Simon. What do we know about, and that James Simon at number six, George Soros at number seven. George Soros might be, the number one target of anti-Semitic critiques when it comes to this donor list, but comes in at number seven. What do we know about number eight, Stephen and Christine Schwartzman? Blackstone.
Stephen Schwartzman, is a hedge fund guy and who's been around for a long time and supporting conservative causes for a long time. And he is closely connected to the Trump administration.
The biggest thing that's not on the list, I'll say some of the other names. Fred Eichener, never heard of Fred Eichener. The Kenneth Griffin gave $11 million. The CEO of Citadel, another hedge fund in Chicago. Bezos comes in at number 11 with $10.1 million. One of the Mellons, Timothy Mellon, the conservative who gave $10 million worth about $1 billion. The one surprising donation is gave $2,700. Gave mostly to the Conservative Congressional Leadership PAC, but gave a $2,700 donation to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. That puzzled you. Any speculation as to why?
No, we looked into that. We couldn't find anything. We couldn't find any other reporting that anyone had done about that. So I have no idea. I mean, it seems like it couldn't have been a typo, an error.
Right.
That's even though it's a small donation for him, it must have been intentional. But no, we couldn't find anything about that.
I did want to bring up Blackstone because as we've been dealing with housing crises in so many American cities, Blackstone as a hedge fund has been driving up housing prices in part because of pouring so much investment money into real estate, and Blackstone one of the biggest players in homeownership in all of the country. But I wanted to talk about a couple names that aren't on this list and get to the point that you raised, which is that this is at least. How did you go about finding this? Presumably it was just looking at federal contribution filings. Was there any other information you tried to access to get to these figures? Because in the era of Citizens United, there's a lot you can't know about, right?
Right. So these numbers are from the Center for Responsive Politics, and they have a great website called opensecrets.org that collects these numbers and analyzes them. So for this piece, we use those numbers, and we didn't get into trying to figure out what might be missing here. That is a huge undertaking that we just didn't have the resources for this particular piece. But yeah, so all of these are likely underestimates, and also these may have changed a little bit. This was published a couple days before the midterm, so they may have gone up a little bit in those last couple days.
Koch brothers don't make the list. Is that because they ran out of money or because they no longer care about changing the American political system?
They definitely didn't run out of money, and I think they definitely still care. I think they are likely not on this list because they're just not giving under their own names, and they are finding ways to kind of lay low. They also are not enthusiastic about Trump. So while they are definitely still giving to conservative causes, they didn't give as much in the 2016 election as they planned on giving, and they're not supporting Trump with as much publicity as they've supported other candidates in the past.
Yeah, and one of the favorite books of a lot of listeners to this show is Nancy McLean's Democracy in Chains, and her case is that their effort, and this is written before Donald Trump, or research was done before Donald Trump, and before Brett Kavanaugh, before what happened with Merrick Garland, that their effort has been the courts. They got the Supreme Court justice. They don't care as much about the House, and they've been building the apparatus outside the elected sphere. Natalie Jones, anything I didn't ask you that I should have?
I don't think so.
Thank you so much for joining us. Thanks for reporting.
Thank you.
All right.